After a bitter divorce, 34-year-old Ava Morales moved to the quiet suburb of Willow Bend, Ohio, with her 9-year-old son, Leo. The city had become too loud, too many memories, too little space for a boy to be a boy. Their new home wasn't fancy, just a cozy 2-bedroom with peeling shutters and a giant oak tree dominating the backyard. That tree quickly became a promise, a new beginning. 6 months after the move, Ava's father, Hector, moved in. A retired machinist with hands that never quite stopped looking for something to fix. He brought with him a silence that had aged with him. He wasn't talkative, but he never needed to be. His tools said enough. When Hector suggested he and Leo build something together, maybe a little lookout tower, he said casually over dinner, Ava thought it would be a weekend distraction. But it became a ritual, sawdust in the wind. Leo's giggles mixing with the metallic rhythm of hammers. Saturdays and Sundays blurred into a blur of nails, paint, and effort. They built it slow, methodical, no shortcuts. Hector taught Leo to measure twice, cut once. They chose colors together, bright red and sky blue. Ava watched them from the kitchen window, sipping coffee and smiling to herself. The project wasn't just about wood and bolts. It was about building something stronger between a boy and his grandfather. Leo named it the Lookout Nest. He made a wooden sign and painted the letters himself, crooked and bold. The treehouse had a trapdoor, a pulley system for snacks, and Hector's old army telescope mounted on a swiveling board. Leo insisted on sleeping in it the night it was finished. Ava tucked him in with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. That night, the moon hung low and full, and for the first time in a long time, Ava felt like they might actually be okay. 3 days later, everything shattered. It was early morning. Ava stepped out onto the back deck, coffee in hand, ready for the calm routine she'd grown to love. The air was cool, the kind that whispers of autumn, and for a second, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. The treehouse gone. Not dismantled, not taken down with care. Obliterated. Pieces of wood scattered like kindling across the grass. Splintered beams. The painted sign Leo had made snapped in half. The oak itself bore deep, angry gouges at the base, like it had tried to defend itself and lost. Ava stood frozen coffee, cooling in her hand. Then came the voice. It was unsafe, and it blocked our view. She turned. Franklin Tate stood on his porch next door, arms crossed, expression blank. He wore pressed khakis and a tucked-in collared shirt, as if he were on his way to a country club meeting. Behind him, his wife clutched their small dog, looking anywhere but at Ava. We didn't want to involve the city, Tate added. But you really should have gotten a permit. That thing was a hazard, and frankly an eyesore. Ava didn't respond. Her throat burned with the scream she refused to let out. She walked back inside. For hours, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Leo was still asleep upstairs, unaware. Hector hadn't come in yet. He was out at the hardware store picking up brackets for the mini weather vane Leo had wanted to add. Ava felt the silence press in around her, thick and unforgiving. By the time Hector returned, Ava had made up her mind. She stood, grabbed her keys, and left without a word. She drove aimlessly for a while, circling through back roads and familiar exits. Finally, she pulled into a gravel driveway. 2 towns over stopped the car and waited. The man who answered the door wasn't surprised to see her, just nodded and said, "Still got what you need." She left with a tarp-covered bundle in the trunk and a hard, quiet focus. That night, she didn't sleep. Leo stayed in her bed, When he'd seen the wreckage, he didn't cry, just asked over and over, why would someone do that? Ava didn't have an answer. He fell asleep clinging to her arm like a lifeline. She stared at the ceiling for hours. At 12:47 a.m., the last light in Tate's house flicked off. Ava got up, went to the garage, and opened the trunk. What she had wasn't illegal. Not exactly, but it would make a point Franklin Tate would smell for weeks, maybe longer. She moved in silence, gloves on, focused. No anger in her movements, just purpose. The same kind of purpose her son had used when painting each letter of that sign. She wasn't out for revenge. She was out for justice. And that night, the winds in Willow Bend carried the scent of a warning. One man might have torn down the treehouse, but Ava Morales was just getting started. Ava Morales never considered herself the type to retaliate. She was a single mom, a woman just trying to rebuild a life that had already been shattered once. But that morning, staring at the treehouse wreckage, something inside her shifted. It wasn't rage exactly. It was colder, sharper, a slow burn that settled in her chest like an ember. By the time she slipped her keys into the ignition, she didn't have a plan, just a direction. She drove with the windows down the early fall air, brushing against her face. The fields blurred past gold and rust under the sun. Willow Bend disappeared behind her, the weight of quiet suburbia fading as she approached a forgotten exit on the outer loop of Dayton. 2 towns over down a gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Ava pulled into a wide lot behind an old mechanic's shop. The hand-painted sign on the door had faded so much it was barely legible. She parked and waited. The man who eventually stepped out was lean and weathered with a salt and pepper beard and dark circles under his eyes. His name was Joey Plaskett, though most people called him Patch. No one really remembered why. He didn't smile when he saw her, just nodded once slow. Been a minute. He said, his voice low like gravel crunching. Yeah, Ava said, hands in her jacket pockets. I need something. Patch motioned for her to follow and disappeared into a back shed. Inside it smelled like rust and old motor oil. He pulled back a canvas tarp and revealed a stack of container supplies, salvaged from various landscaping jobs, industrial-strength plastic wrap, gallons of thick, dark fish emulsion, buckets with cracked lids and labels long gone. I remember you said this stuff was the worst thing you ever had to clean up, Ava said. Patch grunted. Rotten fish and fermented bone meal. Smells like hell. Clings to everything. She handed him a folded $100 bill. That'll cover it. He didn't count it. Just nodded again and helped her load the items into the trunk. As he secured the tarp over the top, he glanced at her sideways. Whatever this is, it's not going to fix the broken stuff. It's not for fixing, Ava replied. It's for remembering. She drove back in silence each mile, stripping away her doubts like dead leaves in the wind. She wasn't out for violence. She wasn't that kind of woman. But people like Franklin Tate understood only 2 things: control and consequence. And tonight, he would get a dose of both. Back in Willow Bend, the sun had started to dip. The sky was awash in orange, melting into indigo, as streetlights blinked awake. Ava parked 2 houses down and backed into the driveway. She didn't want Leo seeing what she was unloading. Not yet. He was inside with Hector, probably eating grilled cheese and watching a sci-fi movie with the volume too low. She moved quickly. The plastic wrap was heavy, thick like shipping tarp. The emulsion bucket sloshed ominously, the smell already creeping through the lid seals. She stashed everything in the garage behind Hector's old tool chest, where Leo wouldn't notice. At dinner, everything felt normal, at least on the surface. Leo had questions, of course, about what had happened, about why people did bad things when no one was looking. Ava answered with a half-truth. Some people think the world should revolve around them. They see joy or noise or color, and it scares them, so they tear it down. Leo nodded, not quite understanding, but he trusted her, and for now that was enough. Later that night, after brushing his teeth and curling up under his comic book blanket, he whispered, "I miss the treehouse already." Ava kissed his forehead. "So do I." Midnight came fast. Ava sat in the dark living room lights, off waiting. She'd changed into black sweats, tied her hair up tight, gloves on, boots laced. At exactly 12:46 a.m., the lights in the Tate house blinked out. She waited an extra 10 minutes listening. No cars, no footsteps, just the hum of the fridge and the distant howl of a dog. Then she moved. She opened the garage, slipped the items into a small garden cart, and rolled it around to the side of her house, staying in the shadows. The Tate property backed up against hers, separated by a row of bushes and a half-rotted wooden fence. She knew the layout well. She crawled under the fence, dragging the cart behind her. Her gloves gripped the plastic roll, unspooling it like saran wrap on steroids. She wrapped it beneath the porch beams tight like a cocoon. Then she sliced a hole in the top layer and tipped the first bucket. The emulsion poured slowly, thick and sticky like oil, mixed with death. The stench hit immediately, but Ava kept going. 2 more buckets followed. The smell soaked into the wood, the soil, the air. She wiped the crowbar clean and placed it quietly in the grass. Then for the finishing touch, she pulled out a wooden sign, an exact replica of the one Leo had made for the treehouse. The same paint, same jagged edges, same shaky handwriting, but this one said, "We see everything from here." She hammered it into the grass directly under Tate's front window. Then she vanished into the night. The first thing Ava noticed was how quickly the smell began to thicken. Even before she'd finished pouring the second bucket of emulsion, a rancid fog rose from beneath the porch, curling into her nostrils with the punch of decay. She flinched, blinking hard, fighting the urge to gag. It was worse than she remembered from Patch's stories, worse than fish markets on a hot summer day, worse than the bottom of a garbage truck after a storm. This wasn't just stink. It was aggression in vapor form. She tightened the last layer of plastic wrap around the joists beneath Franklin Tate's back porch, nailing the corners taut like a drummer stretching a snare. The emulsion was pooling inside the wrap, now soaking into the wood beams, seeping into every crevice. The heat that would come with the sunrise tomorrow, that would activate the true hell of it. Ava worked in the dark, but methodically. Her gloves were slick, and her heart was thudding not out of fear, but precision. She didn't want to be caught, not because she was ashamed, but because this had to be clean, undeniable, legal in its own twisted way. She moved silently back to the front of the property, where the grass was neatly trimmed, the bushes obsessively shaped into squares. She stood in front of the large bay window, one Tate had insisted was his view to serenity, and pressed the legs of the sign into the soft earth. She knelt down and hammered the wooden stake with the side of her palm. "We see everything from here." She paused for a second, hand still on the sign, the weight of it not physical, but emotional. This wasn't a message to Tate. Not really. It was a message for Leo, a promise in wood and paint that what had been stolen would be acknowledged. Back at her house, she scrubbed her hands raw in the kitchen sink. Even through the gloves, the smell had clung to her skin. She stripped out of her clothes, tossed them into a trash bag, and triple knotted it. She wouldn't risk Leo waking up to the scent of revenge. Morning arrived slowly. The house creaked as it warmed the sun crawling up over the roof lines. Ava was already on the porch, with her coffee legs tucked under her eyes, fixed on the Tate house. At 7:33 a.m., the show began. The front door swung open and Franklin Tate strutted out, with his usual stiff-posture newspaper under one arm mug in hand. He didn't see the sign at first. He took 2 steps before his expression twitched. Then he froze. Ava didn't blink. He walked over, stared at the sign, and then the smell hit him. His body recoiled like he'd been slapped. He staggered back, dropping the mug onto the porch with a dull shatter. The scent reached his face fully then, and the reaction was instant. He coughed, violently waved his hand in front of his nose, and looked around wild-eyed. Mary Tate appeared a moment later. She lasted half a second before doubling over, clutching her nose. "What on earth is that?" she cried out, gagging as she stumbled back inside. Franklin was yelling now, pacing in a tight circle like a man whose world had tilted off balance. He barked into his phone, gesturing at the porch, then the sign, then the bushes, like they were part of some coordinated attack. Ava took another sip of coffee, calm and still. Within hours, a cleaning company arrived. 4 men in disposable coveralls and masks examined the porch, like it was toxic. One of them peeled back the plastic and immediately staggered away, retching in the bushes. By noon, they were tearing up the wooden floorboards. Neighbors began to gather. Mr. Jefferson watched from his driveway. The couple across the street peeked through their blinds. No one said a word, but the energy shifted. Whispers spread like pollen. Everyone could see what was happening, and no one was stepping in to stop it. 3 days passed. Every time Tate opened a window, the smell found its way inside. The cleaning crews tried everything: power washing, sanding, even replacing the floorboards. But the emulsion had soaked deep. It was in the insulation in the vents. It had made itself at home. On the 4th day, Ava saw Tate sitting on the porch stairs, a towel pressed to his face, eyes watery. His wife had left hours earlier with a suitcase. Ava didn't know if she was visiting family or just needed air. She didn't care. What mattered was this he was unraveling, not from a crime, but from the slow legal consequences of his own selfishness. There would be no lawsuit, no police reports, just discomfort, disgrace. That night, Ava stood in the backyard under the stars, staring up at the empty spot in the oak tree. The old boards still lay in a pile near the shed, and Leo's sign, the real one, was tucked safely inside her closet. The ache hadn't left her, but it had dulled, replaced by a sense of quiet triumph. She wasn't proud of what she'd done, but she didn't regret it either. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words, only consequences. By the 5th day, the smell hadn't gone away, it had evolved. What began as a sharp rot had turned musty, sour and dense like mold, growing in the walls of a forgotten basement. Even with the porch boards replaced, the stench clung to Tate's house, like shame on a guilty man. It seeped into everything: the cushions on the patio chairs, the wood grain in the handrails, the very air around the front door. Ava was on her porch again that morning, dressed in sweats, mug in hand. It had become her routine. the quiet observation, the morning reckoning. She watched as Tate staggered out of his house, now wearing surgical gloves and a painter's mask. He was muttering to himself, head swiveling like he expected an ambush from the bushes. He bent down and yanked the mocking sign out of the lawn with both hands, Leo's replicated handwriting facing the sky one last time. "We see everything from here." He hurled it onto his porch with a grunt, then paced like a man possessed. From across the street, Mrs. Langley peeked through her front curtains. She wasn't subtle. Neither was the jogger who slowed down in front of the house, lifting her sunglasses to stare. Word was getting around. The following day, Ava overheard the first conversation. At the grocery store, 2 aisles over, someone whispered, "Did you hear about the Tates?" Something about a smell. Whole porch reeked like... I don't even know. "I heard it was retaliation," the other voice replied, "because of the treehouse. You remember that thing I thought that was just neighborhood gossip? No, it's true. My husband said he saw them tearing it down. No warning, no nothing. That's how it began. Little drips of awareness spreading like oil on pavement." Back on Willow Bend Drive, the mood had shifted. For months, Tate had ruled the street with thinly veiled complaints and smug superiority. He was the one who left anonymous notes about recycling bins being left out too long. The one who reported backyard fire pits. The one who called the HOA because someone painted their door coral instead of beige. But now, as he struggled to breathe in his own yard, without gagging, people noticed something else. They weren't afraid of him anymore. The Jeffersons were the first to act. The very next weekend, they hosted their grandchildren for an outdoor picnic. Ava smiled as she watched the kids run through the sprinkler, their laughter echoing across the yards. It was the same laughter Tate had once complained about, disturbing the peace, he'd claimed. 2 houses down the young couple, Jordan and Sienna, set up a portable speaker in their garage and played vinyl records while painting a mural on their fence. Something bright and abstract. When Tate walked by on his evening pacing loop, he paused, stared, opened his mouth like he might protest, and then kept walking. Ava didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Hector noticed too. One evening, sitting on the back steps with a screwdriver in one hand and a beer in the other, he nodded toward the neighbors. "They're waking up," he murmured. "Yeah," Ava replied. "It's about time." It wasn't long before the stories started rolling in. At first, it was in hushed voices. A knock on the door. A neighbor asking to talk. But soon the stories spilled over like a dam had cracked. He reported us to the city because our grass was too long. He called animal control on our dog twice. Said he barked too loud at night. He's a pug. He told my daughter her chalk drawings made the sidewalk look tacky. Each confession felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Ava had always suspected Tate wasn't just a grump. He was a manipulator, a man who used rules as weapons, who enforced silence as if it were a neighborhood ordinance. And now, for the first time, he was the one being watched. The week after the porch incident, Ava organized a casual block coffee hour. Just a few folding chairs in her front yard, a couple thermoses of hot brew, and an open invitation. 7 households showed up. They brought pastries, stories, and most importantly, solidarity. There was no mention of the sign, no mention of the fish emulsion. But every person who sat in Ava's yard that morning shared a look, a silent agreement that they were done letting one man dictate how they lived. "He's not going to change," Mr. Jefferson said, folding his arms. "But we can." And they did. Sidewalk chalk bloomed again across the driveways. String lights were strung between fences. The sound of music returned to the evening's soft jazz and old rock, floating out of open garages. A neighborhood that had lived under a shadow began leaning back toward the sun. As the week wore on, Tate retreated. He was still visible, still watching, but his posture had changed. Defensive, paranoid. He moved like a man expecting payback around every corner, even if none came. He barked at delivery drivers, shouted at the city garbage crew for leaving his bin crooked. But the real power he once held, the fear was gone. Ava stood on her porch that Friday evening, watching as Leo played catch with 2 kids from down the block. His laugh rang out like a bell. She glanced at the Tate house, curtains drawn, porch empty. And for the first time since the treehouse was destroyed, Ava allowed herself to smile. Justice, she thought, doesn't always come with a courtroom. Sometimes it comes with coffee and a lawn full of chalk. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Ava was sipping coffee on her porch. Same as always, the morning air still crisp with a whisper of dew. The street was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of birds and the distant rumble of a delivery truck. Then she heard the sound of Mrs. Jefferson crying. It wasn't loud, but it carried. That kind of broken, breathless sob that makes your chest tighten before you even know why. Ava stood up instinctively, set her mug down, and walked toward the Jeffersons' house. By the time she rounded the sidewalk, she saw it, or what was left of it. The swing set just a simple wooden A-frame with 2 plastic swings, and a tiny green slide had been sawed clean through. Not disassembled, not removed. Destroyed. The beams lay in jagged piles like driftwood after a storm. One of the swings still hanging by a single chain, twisted slowly in the breeze. Mrs. Jefferson stood frozen in the yard, hands clutched to her chest. Her husband Howard was on the phone, pacing in tight circles, voice trembling with disbelief. The grandkids weren't there, thank God, but their joy had been. Ava didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look Mr. Jefferson gave her when their eyes met was enough. A mix of shock, fury, and realization. It was him, he said, voice hoarse. Same damn thing. Cut clean through in the middle of the night. Ava walked up slowly, kneeling beside the wreckage. Her fingers grazed a splintered beam, and her stomach twisted. It was the same method, the same disregard. Whoever did this wasn't trying to remove a structure, they were making a statement. Leo's treehouse had been the first. This was no coincidence. She stood, straightened her back, and said it out loud. Franklin Tate did this. Howard didn't argue. His jaw clenched. He said we didn't ask permission, said it was obstructing the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic. He spat the words like poison. Ava nodded, fury boiling under her skin. He's targeting anything he can't control. Mrs. Jefferson let out a shaking breath. They're just children. All we wanted was to give them something to play on, something special. You don't owe anyone an explanation, Ava said gently. This isn't your fault. But the damage was done. The Jeffersons' yard felt different now, violated, the same way Ava's backyard had after that morning. It wasn't about the swing set, just like it hadn't been about the treehouse. It was about power. Tate was declaring himself the gatekeeper of the neighborhood's joy, and anything that didn't meet his rigid, invisible standards would be punished. Word spread fast. That evening, Ava hosted another gathering, this time unplanned. It started with the Jeffersons dropping by, still shaken. Then Jordan and Sienna arrived. Then the older couple from 2 doors down. One by one, they filed into Ava's backyard, pulling up chairs, bringing cookies and casseroles and folding tables, like it was a vigil. Ava didn't lead the conversation. She didn't need to. The swing set had become the spark. Why are we letting one man dictate how we live? Sienna asked, voice tight with frustration. We pay taxes, we raise families, we plant gardens, and this man with his khakis and clipboard gets to decide what joy looks like. I heard he complained about the music. At the 4th of July block party, Jordan added. Said the fireworks were unregulated and disruptive to the elderly. Franklin Tate doesn't care about the rules, Mrs. Langley said, arms crossed. He cares about control. Always has. A hush settled over the group. Then Mr. Jefferson said the quiet part out loud. He's not gonna stop. Not until every sound he doesn't like is gone. That was when Ava stepped forward. Then maybe it's time we stop giving him the space to do it. Eyes turned to her. Some confused, others hopeful. I'm not talking about revenge, she continued. I'm talking about presence. We've all been quiet, tiptoeing around him, but the more we shrink, the more space we give him to rule. Jordan nodded. So we get louder. Exactly, Ava said. We get visible. Someone laughed nervously. What are we supposed to do? Throw a parade? If that's what it takes, Ava replied. But we start by refusing to disappear. That night, the neighbors didn't go home early. They lingered. Some shared old stories about Tate's petty complaints. Others made plans to repaint fences, hang new lights, bring their kids' bikes back into the front yards. It wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. Later, as the sun dipped low, Ava sat alone with Hector, the quiet hum of voices still drifting through the windows. He hadn't said much during the gathering, but now he lit a cigarette, breaking his years-long streak. You know what you're starting right? He asked. Ava looked out at the dark yard, where Leo's broken boards still sat waiting to become something again. I'm starting something. I should have started the day he tore it down. Hector took a long drag and nodded. Good. From that day forward, the war wasn't just Ava's anymore. It belonged to everyone Franklin Tate had ever silenced. Ava knew it wasn't enough to speak in whispers anymore. The destruction of the Jefferson swing set had turned the tide. But what came next had to be deliberate, organized. Not just a flash of collective anger, but a quiet, sustained uprising. One that Franklin Tate wouldn't see coming until it was already rooting itself into the heart of Willow Bend. So she called a meeting. It wasn't formal. No flyers or neighborhood emails. Just a few texts, a handful of knocks on doors, and a shared understanding that something had to change. The following Saturday, 8 families gathered in Ava's backyard, just after sunset. Folding chairs were spread in a wide circle. String lights hung from the trees, casting soft golden pools on the grass. The smell of coffee and baked goods drifted on the breeze, comfort, but also courage. Leo sat on the porch steps with a comic book. Hector leaned against the shed with a thermos in hand, observing. Ava stood in the center of the circle, steady, but unsmiling. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice low but unwavering. I know we've all got our own lives, our own reasons to stay quiet, but I think it's clear staying quiet hasn't protected us. There were nods, tight, grim nods. Mrs. Jefferson was the first to speak. Howard and I bought that swing set with our first Social Security check. We wanted something special for the girls when they visit. And now, she shook her head. They cried when they saw it wrecked. Said it looked like someone hated them. The words hung heavy. Then Sienna raised her hand, though no one needed permission. We got a notice from the HOA last month, because our garage door was left open too long. We weren't even home. It was our nephew house-sitting. Guess who reported it? Same guy who called animal control on my dachshund, grumbled Mr. Langley. Wrote in the complaint that she was vocalizing aggressively. She's 13, half deaf. The stories poured out. One woman said her children were forbidden from riding their scooters past the Tate house because he shouted at them for scratching the pavement. Another man admitted he was fined for planting sunflowers too close to the curb. He said they were botanical obstructions. Can you believe that Ava listened heart-pounding? Not from fear, but from confirmation. This wasn't an isolated incident. Tate had built a reign of pettiness, one citation and phone call at a time. He's turned the HOA into his personal security force, Jordan added. He knows how to use the system. He's not breaking rules, but he's bending them until people just give up. Not anymore. Ava looked around the circle. So what do we do? I'm not suggesting anything illegal. No retaliation. No vandalism. But we have every right to live without fear. Mr. Jefferson leaned forward. Then we start taking back our space. Publicly. Consistently. Mrs. Langley nodded firmly. I'm repainting our mailbox. Bright yellow. Don't care what the guidelines say. The ideas came quickly after that. A rotating schedule of backyard play dates. Sunday morning driveway chalk sessions for the kids. Evening music hours with old speakers and lawn chairs. A community garden proposal for the empty lot at the end of the street. We're not trying to antagonize him, Ava reminded them. We're just not hiding anymore. We've already tried appeasing him, Mrs. Jefferson said flatly. Didn't work. Let him file another complaint about my wind chimes, I'll frame it. They laughed. It was the first real laugh some of them had shared in weeks. Hector finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. It's about dignity, he said simply. You can lose a fight and still keep your dignity. But if you keep letting someone push you around, that's harder to get back. Ava looked at him, her father a man who had lived through wars both personal and national. He knew what he was talking about. They broke the meeting with a sense of solidarity stronger than words. Plans were set in motion. The revolution wouldn't come in waves, but in steady ripples, small acts of joy and color and noise, each one chipping away at the foundation of fear Tate had spent years building. That night, as the neighbors trickled home, Ava lingered with Hector and Leo on the porch. Are we doing the right thing? She asked. Hector didn't answer right away. He sipped his drink, then looked out toward the dark silhouette of the Tate house. You don't fight a bully by becoming one, but you sure as hell don't win by sitting down either. Leo looked up from his book. Are we gonna build the treehouse again? Ava smiled. Yeah, kiddo, we are. And this time, it wouldn't just be for Leo. It would be for all of them. The first beam went up on a Saturday morning. The sun hadn't fully crested the rooftops when Ava and Hector started hauling lumber into the backyard. The sound of wood thudding against the grass broke the stillness like a starter pistol. Leo was already dressed in his tool belt face, lit with that rare combination of excitement and focus. This time, they weren't building in silence. Jordan came by around 10 with his power drill and a cooler full of sodas. By noon, the Jeffersons' son-in-law was mixing concrete for the base supports. Sienna brought cookies. Mrs. Langley contributed paint, bright teal sunshine yellow and cherry red. No one asked if it was allowed. The design was Hector's idea. Simple, sturdy, with an elevated deck, a sloped roof, and a spiral ladder that curved around the trunk. But Ava made the final call on one addition, a solar-powered motion-activated spotlight mounted on the roof's edge. Its angle perfectly aligned with the second-floor window of the Tate house. "If he looks out at night," she said to Hector as they bolted it down, "I want him to see exactly what he tried to destroy." The construction wasn't quiet. Power tools hummed. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker, Motown rock a little salsa when Hector took over. Kids zoomed up and down driveways on scooters, the sidewalks erupting in chalk drawings of dragons, suns, flowers, and oddly specific political cartoons, featuring a grumpy old man with a megaphone. Willow Bend had come alive again. Each day, someone new came to help. One woman brought lemonade and folding chairs so the older neighbors could sit and watch. Another dropped off extra screws and nails from her garage. Even the shy family from the cul-de-sac showed up with their twin daughters, who handed Leo a homemade sign that read, "Welcome to Treehouse 2.0. By midweek, the frame was complete. The treehouse stood taller than the last one, with wide beams and stronger supports. Inside, Hector installed hooks for walkie-talkies, a shelf for comic books, and a makeshift telescope bracket like before. Ava found a small rug at a thrift store and laid it down under the trapdoor. Leo painted the new sign himself. The letters were bigger, neater this time, but still unmistakably his. It read, "The Lookout Nest. Rebuilt stronger." That Friday night they held a ribbon cutting, just for the block. Leo stood on the deck, oversized scissors in hand, while neighbors clapped and cheered from below. The spotlight turned on just as the sun disappeared, casting a clean white beam across the yard, bright, unmissable, defiant. From the second floor of the Tate house, a curtain twitched, but no one cared. Later that evening, Ava sat on the porch steps, hands sore back, aching but chest light. She watched as Leo climbed up into the treehouse flashlight bobbing behind him. His friends followed one by one. Soon laughter echoed through the yard, the kind that dances through leaves and turns wood and nails into something magical. That same laughter spilled out into the neighborhood. Mrs. Jefferson's grandkids played hopscotch on the walkway. The young couple down the street hosted an impromptu dance party in their driveway. Even the Langley boys, who hadn't spoken much since their dog incident, were back outside tossing a frisbee into the dusk. Hector sat beside Ava, sipping tea instead of beer this time. "Feels different," he murmured. "It is," she replied. "It's not just about the treehouse anymore." "No," he said. "It's about claiming space, not asking permission to exist." Ava nodded, watching the lights flicker in her son's new fortress. "It's about joy." Around 9, Tate finally emerged. He stood in his driveway, arms crossed, surveying the block, like a landlord inspecting unpaid tenants. He said nothing, did nothing, just stared. The music didn't stop. Neither did the laughter. For the first time in months, Tate wasn't the center of anything. He wasn't feared or followed. He was ignored. And in that moment, Ava knew the war was shifting. Not because they'd beaten him yet, but because they were no longer hiding. They were building, growing, laughing. That's what scared a man like Franklin Tate more than anything. That night, long after the neighbors had gone inside and the music had faded, Ava climbed up into the new treehouse. Leo was asleep, curled up in his sleeping bag, with a flashlight still glowing beside him. She sat next to him, watching the stars blink between the branches. Below, the motion light turned off. The yard dimmed, silence returned, but it was no longer the kind of silence you tiptoe through. It was the kind that follows peace. For the first time since the first hammer struck, that Oak Ava felt not just like a mother or a fighter, but like a builder of homes, of strength, of community. and above all of something no petty tyrant could ever tear down again. It was 2:17 a.m. when Ava heard the noise. Not loud, just a faint metallic clink, like something bumping against the chain-link fence along the side yard. At first she thought it was the wind, or a raccoon knocking over a garden tool, but something about the rhythm felt deliberate, too slow, too precise. She rose from bed barefoot, heart thudding. Her instincts weren't wrong often. From the hallway she peeked into Leo's room. He was still asleep, limbs sprawled, mouth slightly open, his face lit by the glow of the nightlight. Ava padded to the living room, pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. There he was, Franklin Tate, dressed head to toe in black, a ball cap pulled low, and in his gloved hands, bolt cutters glinting under the moonlight. He moved toward the new treehouse, stepping carefully across the grass, like he'd mapped it out. Ava's breath stopped. The anger came fast, hot, and immediate. But underneath it, a hard steel of resolve rose. She didn't scream, didn't grab her phone. Instead, she walked quietly to the hall closet, opened it, and took out Hector's old aluminum baseball bat. She held it low, her grip steady. She slipped out the back door like a shadow. The grass was cool under her feet as she crossed the yard bat in hand. The motion sensor light hadn't triggered. Tate had come from the side, the only blind spot left. He was just under the ladder, staring up at the spotlight like he was trying to figure out how to dismantle it. "Don't even think about it," Ava said. Tate froze. She watched his shoulders tense before he turned slowly. In the glow of the moon and streetlight, she saw his face pale under the cap. "What the hell are you doing in my yard?" Ava's voice was low, sharp with cold fury. He tried to bluff. "It's a hazard. I was just making sure it wouldn't." "Don't lie," she snapped. "You're holding bolt cutters in your hand at 2 a.m. You crossed my fence, my property line." He opened his mouth, but she stepped forward, raising the bat slightly, not to swing, but to let him know how close she was to it. "You've already destroyed one treehouse. You won't touch this one." Tate looked around like someone might come to his defense, but the neighborhood was dark, silent, and for the first time, he looked unsure, vulnerable. "You need to leave," Ava said. "Right now. I have a right." "No, you don't. Not anymore. You're trespassing. One more step and I'm calling the cops." For a moment, Tate looked like he might argue. Then he glanced at the bat again, at Ava's face, and saw there was no room left to bully. He stepped back, slowly, then dropped the bolt cutters on the grass and walked off without another word. Ava didn't move until he'd disappeared behind his hedges. Only then did she lower the bat and exhale. Her hands were shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. She picked up the bolt cutters and brought them inside, wiped them down, placed them in a paper bag, and labeled it with the time and date. Evidence, just in case. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the whole block knew something had happened. No one had seen the confrontation, but word spread fast, especially after the police cruiser rolled into Ava's driveway at 9:12 a.m. 2 officers, one uniformed, one in plain clothes. They were polite, but not warm. "Ms. Morales," the plainclothes officer began, "we received a report from Mr. Tate that you threatened him last night with a weapon." Ava raised an eyebrow. Did he mention the bolt cutters? Or the fact he was in my yard at 2 a.m? He claims he was checking on a safety concern. "Funny," she said. "He didn't seem concerned when he was sneaking around like a thief." She led them to the garage and handed over the paper bag. Inside, the bolt cutters, clean, untouched except for the date and time written in her neat handwriting. The officer looked at it, then back at her. "Do you have any video footage?" Ava smiled thinly. "Behind the shed. We mounted a camera after the swing set was destroyed. Battery-powered, motion-activated. By noon, she'd given them everything footage timestamps her statement. They left without saying much, but she could see it in their faces, they knew. Still the next day, a letter came. Franklin Tate had filed a temporary restraining order. The paperwork was filled with exaggerated language, hostile behavior, menacing with a blunt object, targeted harassment, including floodlights, and disruptive gatherings. He even cited the spotlight as a direct attempt at intimidation. And unbelievably, the judge granted it temporary for review pending hearing. Ava couldn't believe it. She had to sit Leo down and explain that for the next few weeks, they couldn't use the backyard as freely, that the treehouse was off limits for now, not because of anything Leo had done, but because of how the system worked, when men like Tate knew how to twist it. Leo didn't cry. He just stared out the window, the edge of his jaw tightening. Why is he still allowed to do this? Ava didn't have a clean answer. Later that evening, Hector found her outside staring at the treehouse in silence. He lit a cigarette and didn't speak until half of it was ash. "You want to beat a man like that," he said. "You don't fight him with your fists. You bleed him slow. The same way he's bled this street for years." Ava turned to him, a flicker of something in her eyes. And in that moment, a new plan began to take shape. Not with bats, with paper. Ava had never been the type to enjoy paperwork, but over the next few weeks, she became a master of it. Every evening after dinner, after Leo was tucked in, after Hector finished his nightly smoke on the porch, she sat at the dining table, surrounded by manila folders, and her aging laptop. Her search started small, just a basic public records request through the city's website. Then it grew. Permits, easements, fencing ordinances, property line surveys. It took less than a week for the cracks to show. Franklin Tate's house was pristine on the outside, fresh paint, neatly trimmed hedges, polished brass numbers. But behind that was a mountain of corner cutting. The patio extension he'd added 3 years ago had an expired permit. The retaining wall along the west end of his yard. No inspection sign-off, and the 8-foot privacy fence. According to the city code, anything over 6 feet required a variance hearing. There was no record of one. Ava compiled everything, color-coded, cross-referenced, every inconsistency marked and dated. "Paper beats privilege," Hector said with a quiet grin one night, watching her draw circles around Tate's retaining wall photos. She didn't stop there. She joined a local Facebook group for small contractors and property owners in the county. In the comments, she asked innocent questions about property line maintenance, illegal fence extensions, and gray areas in homeowner upgrades. She posted a few photos, never mentioned names. But the group was active. Some of the members even worked in code enforcement or zoning. It didn't take long before someone messaged her privately, asking for an address. Then came the promise, "We'll take a look." Within 10 days, a city inspector knocked on Tate's door. Ava watched it from her living room window, heart-steady tea in hand. Tate answered, wearing his usual button-up and khakis. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the shift in his posture. First defensive, then bewildered. By the time the inspector left, Tate was pacing his front porch, with his phone clutched like a grenade. 2 days later, another inspection. This time 2 officials. They walked the entire property, taking notes, pointing occasionally, shaking their heads. Tate followed behind them, red-faced, visibly agitated. The next week, a violation notice was taped to his door. The patio extension had to be removed or brought up to code with a variance request. The fence would need to be reduced or formally approved. Drainage issues from his downspouts were reported possibly affecting runoff into public spaces. And just like that, the very rules he'd used to punish everyone else began to fold in on him. But Ava wasn't done. She submitted anonymous complaints to the HOA regarding his lack of landscape maintenance, something she knew he prided himself on. She reported irregular lighting installations that didn't follow code. Quietly, carefully, without ever crossing the line of legality, she turned the very system he had mastered back onto him. It worked. One morning, Ava walked Leo to the bus stop and passed the Tate property. He was in the yard arguing with two contractors, gesturing at a blueprint with wild frustration. His wife Mary stood by the front door, arms crossed, looking like she was already halfway out of the marriage. From that point, the neighborhood changed in ways Tate couldn't stop. The Jeffersons had their swing set rebuilt, this time with brighter paint and reinforced beams. Mrs. Langley's wind chimes grew louder. 3 new ones hung with pride. Jordan and Sienna painted a mural of trees and kids playing across their backyard fence. The words "Let them laugh" scrawled boldly beneath it. Tate tried to push back. He filed another complaint with the HOA. It went ignored. He called the city to report Ava's treehouse again, but now she had full permits, approved setbacks, and signed inspection reports ready. She even laminated a copy and taped it to her shed. The more he fought, the less power he had. Neighbors stopped waving. Delivery drivers rolled their eyes when he called out instructions. A petition even circulated quietly at first, then with momentum to have him removed from the HOA board. Ava never once raised her voice, never crossed his lawn, never spoke to him directly. But she saw the results each morning. Tate's shoulders slumped a little lower, his porch emptier, his world smaller. Then came the final crack. One evening, Ava stood at her sink washing dishes when she saw Mary Tate pack a suitcase into the back of their SUV. No yelling, no drama, just quiet resolve. She got in, started the engine, and drove off without a glance back. The next morning, a "for sale" sign appeared on the lawn. Ava didn't cheer, didn't smirk. She just brought her coffee out to the porch like she always did, watching the wind nudge the sign back and forth like a pendulum. Like time, catching up to the man who had spent so long holding everyone else in place. That night, she stood under the treehouse and looked up. Leo was sitting on the deck, flashlight in hand, drawing something in his notebook. "Everything okay up there?" she called. He looked down and smiled. "Yeah, just watching." She smiled back. Good, because now there was something worth watching again. It started quietly, the way most endings do. A "for sale" sign appeared on Franklin Tate's perfectly manicured lawn one morning, as unceremonious as a lawn gnome. No explanation, no farewell notes. Just a metal stake in the ground, swinging ever so slightly in the breeze like a white flag. Ava watched it from her front porch, coffee in hand. No part of her cheered. There was no celebration, no "we won" speech. Just the slow, unmistakable unraveling of a man who had spent years strangling joy out of his neighborhood until there was none left for himself. Mary Tate never returned. Neighbors whispered about the arguments, the sleepless nights, the months of pressure boiling over. One said Mary had moved in with her sister in Columbus. Another said she'd filed for divorce. Ava didn't dig into it. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about what came next. The weeks that followed felt lighter. Music drifted from garages in the evenings. Chalk bloomed again across driveways. Kids on scooters and skateboards darted across sidewalks. Mrs. Jefferson hosted Sunday lemonade hours, where neighbors, some who hadn't spoken in years, lingered long after the cups were empty. No one avoided eye contact anymore. Tate still lived on the block for a time, but he was no longer its center. People passed him without acknowledgement. He stood at the edge of his yard, like a man watching a parade he wasn't invited to join. The inspections continued. The fence was taken down, the patio jackhammered to rubble. His face grew more sunken each day, as if the house itself was feeding on the control he'd lost. And then came the final morning. The moving trucks arrived at sunrise, 2 of them plain white, with no company logos. A pair of young movers hauled boxes, while Tate stood by the porch, barking vague instructions, though no one seemed to listen. He wore his usual button-up sleeves rolled, but his shirt was wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved. Ava didn't move from her perch on the porch steps. She didn't need to. She knew this was the last act. From up in the treehouse, Leo sat with his knees pulled to his chest, watching the trucks like a soldier on watch. After a long silence, he called down. "Is he leaving because of us?" Ava thought for a moment before answering. "He's leaving because of the choices he made," she said, her voice calm. "But we're part of why he couldn't stay." Leo nodded slowly, then looked back toward the house. He didn't look proud or angry, just thoughtful, like something in him was still working it out. When the final box was loaded, Tate walked down his driveway for the last time. He didn't look up at the treehouse, didn't glance toward Ava's porch. He climbed into the passenger seat of the truck and shut the door. No one waved. The trucks pulled away their tires, crunching softly on the gravel. And just like that, he was gone. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Ava sat on the back steps with Hector. Between them was a small cooler with 2 sweating bottles of beer. "He's really gone," Ava said, not looking at her father. "Yep," Hector replied, unscrewing the cap. "I thought I'd feel something more. Sometimes all you feel at the end of a storm is the quiet." They sat that way for a while, sipping, watching the shadows stretch across the yard. The rebuilt treehouse stood tall above them, its colors glowing warm in the golden hour. The motion sensor clicked, and the spotlight lit up for a few seconds before fading again. Leo was up there, legs swinging over the edge, a book open in his lap, flashlight dangling from a hook. He wasn't reading, not really, just sitting, watching. "You think he'll remember this?" Ava asked. Hector leaned back. "Maybe not all of it, not the details, but he'll remember how it felt, how what felt, to have something taken, and then to get it back, stronger, brighter." Ava smiled faintly. He called it the lookout nest again. Good name. Fitting. They clinked their bottles softly. Around them, the sounds of life filled the air. The distant buzz of a lawnmower, a dog barking happily, kids laughing from 2 yards over. It was the same neighborhood it had always been, but different. Like the soul of it had been scrubbed clean and let loose. Ava stood and looked up at the treehouse. "Leo dinner. Soon." "Okay," he called down, then paused. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, thanks for building it again." Her chest tightened. "You built it too," she said. "You never stopped believing it could come back." He gave her a shy grin and disappeared back inside the treehouse. That night, after the dishes were done and the windows closed, Ava stood at the back door one last time, lights off looking out. The treehouse stood tall in the moonlight, silent and proud. It wasn't just wood and paint. It was a monument to resistance, to joy reclaimed, to every quiet battle fought with dignity, and every loud laugh that could no longer be silenced. And as long as it stood, so would the reminder they had won.